All right, good morning. Welcome to tutorial 3, designing a page layout. Some things we'll look at today is creating a reset style sheet, look at page layout designs, center a block element, create a floating element, clear a floating layout, prevent container collapse, and explore grid-based layouts. We create a layout grid, format a grid, explore the CCS grid styles, explore positioning styles. We'll work with relative, absolute, and overflow content and relative absolute positioning. We'll see here on example the website that the chapter is building. You see at the top is horizontally centered. Everything is lined up just about perfect. All right, so you got your HTML elements are going to be classified into block elements or inline elements. Block elements you use for paragraphs and headings. Inline elements are going to emphasize text or inline images. You set this up by using the syntax of display in the top, or type is going to define the display type. We see some options here. Some of the display properties. We got the value of block table, inline block, run in, inherit list item, and none. And then their appearance of what those values do. The reset style sheet, it supersedes the browser's default styles and provides a consistent starting point for page design. All right, so first thing we do is use the display property as we display the HTML5 structural elements. So example here, we got all these tags labeled in, and we have display set to block. We'll look at the code. Some of the other settings we have the background being set to transparent, font size being reset to 100%, removed all margins and padding, set the vertical line to the baseline, removed all of the markers and images if we have them for the unordered list. We took the underlines off for navigation, and we set it to single space. A couple layouts we're going to talk about is the fixed layout, which means the size of the page elements are fixed. This is usually going to be set in pixels. The fluid layout is the width of the page elements are set as percentage of the available screen width. And the elastic layout is image and text are always sized in proportion to each other in the EM units. Now looking at fixed and fluid. One thing to keep in mind with your fixed layout, you don't know the screen size of the person that is viewing your web page. All right, so if you set this for a set percentage, as we will look at with our set pixels. For example, in responsive design, layout and design of the page changes in response to the device that's rendering it. So we see here the fixed layout stay the same size regardless of the screen resolution. Okay, so your page may look perfectly fine on this size monitor, but when you get to this size monitor, it's all the way to the left because it's going out the amount of pixels. Fluid layouts, they're going to change based on the screen resolution. You can change the width and height of an element using the width and height values. Use the width, height, and then the value here is one of the CSS units of measurements. You can set it as a percentage of the width or height of a parent element. All right, so we see an example here. We got the web page width sets 95% of the browser window. It's going to range from 640 pixels to 960 pixels. Down here, we're going to display the logo image as a block element, and we'll set the width of the logo to 100% of the page body. So we'll see the example here that the page body is 95%. We've got our Windows background located here, body background, and the logo is going to be 100% of the body width. Notice that it stops where the body ends here. To center a block element, you can center these horizontally with the parent elements. And what you do is you set the left to right margins to auto. So you set body margin left, auto, margin right, auto. To vertically center, you would set the vertical line property to middle. So let's see an example here. We've got this div of the H1 tag. Whatever that word is, chocolates. Pandesaya chocolates. So in here, we're going to set the div. We set the height of that to 40%. We're going to display it in the table cell and vertical line middle. Now this is going to apply the H1 heading and have it vertically centered. When you float an element, it takes it out of position, places it on the left or right side of the parent element. All right, so the floated element, you apply the float position, where position is either going to be none, left, or right. It's going to float them to the left or right margins. We'll see an example of this here. This one here is the original layout. When we add the float to this, it's going to float this to the right page. You see now that this text here is going to float up to the margins. Okay, and then once it clears, it will go to the rest of the margin. So it allows your page to have a better design using the float elements. All right, when you clear a float, you use the clear position. Position is going to be left, right, or both, or none. Left will display the elements only when the left margin is clear of floating objects. Right is the right margin. Both means when it's cleared both of them. And none displays the element alongside any floated object. All right, so we see examples here clearing the floats. The first one's original layout. Our second screen here, we got a float right. Okay, so we see the text here is appearing along with this image. So in this last one, we've got to clear it right on that last paragraph. So it doesn't display until it clears whatever is floating to the right. The content box model, the width property refers to the width of an element content only. Additional space includes padding, borders, border box model. The width property is going to be based on the sum of the content, padding, and border space. So think of it basically as that one of them doesn't include the padding and border, and the border box does. So in this, you do the layout model can be chosen using the box sizing, and then the top is going to be content box, border box, or inherit. Inherit is going to inherit the property defined from the elements container. So looking at this, we'll see here the content box model. We'll see the total width is 230 for this. We've got 200 pixels for the content, 10 for the padding, and then 5 for the border. And same down here, but see the total width down here is listed at 200 because it's only taking into consideration the property set here. Container collapse is an empty container with no content. So we see up here that we got a container that does not enclose any floated content, so it's just kind of sitting there. Looks kind of bad. In this case here, the container is expanded to enclose floated content. And you can usually set in the after pseudo elements. So we have the container. It's at after. We got clear of both. Contents empty. Display table. Where the container is the selector for the elements containing the floating object. Clear property keeps the placeholder element from being inherited until both margins are clear of the floats, and then the element itself is a web table. Contains an empty text string. So see in the example here, we're looking at page layout grids. So what this is going to do is it's aligning your content in grids and rows, or grid columns and grid rows. You see the red outline? It's the indication of the location of the grids in the row columns. The rows and columns of a grid, the number of rows is based on the page content, number of columns based on the number that provides the most flexibility in laying out the page content. So we see an example here of what the rows and columns for a grid looks like. We look at the advantages of using a grid. They add to the presentation of a page contents, add order to it. It gives a consistent logical design. It gives readers a confidence to find the information they seek. It's easily accessible for users with disabilities and special needs. And it increases the development speed with a systematic framework for the page layout. Now, a couple of grids you got here. You got fixed grids. Every column has a fixed position. So the width of the columns and margins are specified in pixels. Fluid grids are going to provide more support across different devices with different screen sizes. Column widths are expressed in percentages. Once again, I want to stress that you do not know the size of the screen that is your users are using to view your website. Framework software package that provides a library of tools to design a website. Some of these may include style sheets for grid layouts and built-in scripts to provide support for a variety of browsers and devices. We see some popular CSS frameworks. Bootstrap is one of the bigger ones. Grid layout is based on rows of floating elements. Each floating element constitutes a column. The set of elements floating side by side establishes a row. And many of these grids are going to use the div element to mark distinct rows or columns of the grid. So we see an example of the code here of a single row with two columns. So we got our div and our class is set to row, which in this case is going to allow us to add the row to the CSS from the CSS. So we set our div class column 1, class column 2. So we see we've got our div class row, excuse me, and the code for this for our second row, second column, third row, and so forth. Now, your grid rows contain floating columns also. So since a new grid row starts a new line within a page, it should only be displayed when both margins are clear of previously floated columns. So we'll see an example of how to do this. The div.row, we're going to clear both. All right, so like I said, every grid column needs to be floated within this row. We see the example here. The grid columns are placed with a div element having a general class name. The class is equal to the column number denominator, which is going to provide the fraction width of the column, the numerator denominator. All right, so we're setting the columns width here. So we see our full column width, half width, columns, and then percentages that are set here as well. All right, so adding the page content, we got a row heading. All right, we're using H2 tags. We got content about chocolate pasted in the first nested column. So we see our first columns here. We're putting our title, our paragraph. Now to outline your grid, these are going to draw lines around the element. It's going to enclose the content, padding in border spaces. We'll do this by setting the outline width and then the value. The value is going to specify the width of a line. So we're going to use either thin, medium, or thick as our values. We set the outline color of the lines. We use it with a CSS color name or value for that as well. You can also set the outline style, specifies the design of the line, So we see the styles we have available are solid, double, dotted, dash, groove, inset, ridge, or outset. So this is like the design of the grid itself, design of the lines. Now, if you want to create a grid display without the use of a div element, use the following grid-based properties. Do a selector, display its grid, and this one you got the grid template rows as track list, grid template columns as track list. Now, when you do this, the grid is going to be the selected elements in the grid. This here. The track list is a space-separated list of row heights and column widths. All right, the FR unit, the fractions, represents a fraction of available space left on a grid after all of the rows or columns have attained their maximum allowable size. For example, in this, the following styles creates 4 columns with the dimensions specified in the style rule. So we have our grid template columns. You see it set as 200 pixels, 250 pixels, and then 1 FR, 2 FR. So those are the fractions of space left over that's available. Grid cells. That's where the elements in the CIST grid are placed. It's the intersection of the specified row and column. By default, all specified elements are going to be placed in a grid cell located at the intersection of the first row and first column. You can change these here as you could put grid row start at the integer, grid row end, grid column. So the integer is going to find the starting, ending row and column number. So we see the layout with positioning styles. Okay, so in here we got we'll start top. The overflow is set to auto. So the browser is going to automatically display scroll bars for overflowed content. Okay, so this allows you to scroll up and down, left and right, depending on the content. The overflow property determines how the browser should handle content that it sees the space allotted to the element. So it doesn't just cut it off. The position is set to relative. Okay, this is used to shift an element from its default position in the document flow. We'll go down now to the div info 1. So we have the position set to absolute for all of these. So it's usually specific coordinates for these. We see over here the top property is going to be provide a top coordinate for an element using a relative, absolute, or fixed positioning. Left property is going to provide the left coordinate. So 20 pixels from the top, 5% from the left. The information will be there. Same for down here. It'll be 185, 42%, and then 135, and then 75%. And these could be any values. They could be any CSS unit of measurement. So you can use pixels. You can use percentages. So we'll see an example of what that output of that code did. So we see the first one was 20 pixels down, 5% from the left. So this was this information here. Then 185% down, 42% from the left. 135% down. And it's going to be 135% or 75% from the left. Notice we do have the scroll bar. Okay, so it's going to be automatically added because we did the overflow properties to auto. All right, our CSS position styles, we can use these to place an item at a specific location within a container. We use position type. Type's going to indicate type of position applied to the element. We can use then the top, right, bottom, left to indicate the coordinates of the element. Now, the position types, we have static position, so the element's going to be placed where it would have fallen naturally within the flow of the document. Excuse me. Relative positioning, the element is moved out of its normal position in the document flow. And then absolute positioning. That's where the element is placed at specific coordinates within the container. So in here we see the original layout. Okay, over here we're using relative positioning. So we got our position set to relative, top 250, left 450. So we're using this to position these elements. So the object's going to be shifted 400 pixels or 250 pixels down and 450 pixels to the right from its default position. So this is being moved over to this area. Now you see the other page elements are remaining the same. Let's give us the original layout. In this, we got the top left corner of the object's placed at 620 pixels down and 30 pixels to the right of the top left edge of the web page. Okay, so it's going from up here. Other images are going to be moved to accommodate that. Fixed positioning fixes an object within a browser window to avoid its movement. Inherited position allows an element to inherit the position value of its parent element. So let's look at the code here. Excuse me. Sorry about that. I would see our div.info box set display none. So it's going to hide the div elements of the info box class. All right, so the main element is going to be used for relative positioning. And we're going to set the height of the main element to 1400 pixels and make it the width of the page body. So we see here the placement of our first information box is set here. All right, so we go to the next one. So we're going to do the display block. We're going to do it from 185 down from the top, 42% from the left margin. The third one's going to be 135 from the top and 75% from the left margin. So we'll see the results here. We see our second information box, and our third box. And those will be based off the settings we have where they appear. All right, so overflow, it controls how the browser handles excess content. So we see your overflow.top, or overflow top. Top is going to be either visible, that's going to be the default, hidden, scroll, or auto. Visible instructs the browser to increase the height of an element to fit the overflow contents. Hidden keeps the element at a specified height and width, but cuts off the excess content. Scroll will allow a scroll bar. It keeps it at that specified dimensions, but it adds a horizontal and vertical scroll bar. Auto will also keep the element at a specified size, and it adds scroll bars when they are needed. So we see examples here of some issues with overflow. This is the overflow X, the overflow Y properties to handle the overflow specifically in horizontal and vertical directions. So we see the first one here, the overflow is set to visible, so it just shows everything. It just expands the container to show all the content. Next one is overflow hidden. Okay, so in this it cuts the content off. So it's the last sentence is early 1993, it cut off, where in the visible it says early 1993, she brought that expertise back to Vermont and the child was born. Scroll is going to add the scroll bars. This is for the vertical and horizontal. And then for the auto, you see it's only added the scroll bar where it's needed. This one's not needed. We're not scrolling left or right. We don't need the vertical or the horizontal. All right, so this we're going to display scroll bars if the content overflows to the allotted height. And we're going to set the height to 450. Clip is going to define a rectangular region which element's content can be viewed. Anything's going to lie outside that boundary the rectangle is hitting. Set the syntax for this. We'll do the clip property. It's clip, and then the rect, and then top right, bottom left. That's going to define the coordinates for the clipping rectangle. So we'll see the example here. We've got our full image here. We want to cut out the background of all those chocolate covered strawberries. So we put the code in a clip. We're at 100 pixels, so we're going to bring it down to 100 pixels. We're going to take it to 270. So we've now defined the top and the right margins of where we're going to stop. The bottom is going to be set to 260. So we're saying, okay, we're going to go all the way down to 260. And then finally, the left is going to be 65. As we see our results here. All right, stacking elements. By default, elements are loaded later by browser. Elements that are loaded later by browser are displayed on top of elements that are loaded earlier. Now we can specify different stacking orders. We use the z-index property. So we see our z-index and we set the value. The value is either going to be a positive or negative integer or the keyword auto. All right, so we see here we have our z-index for these boxes set. Now this is something that only works for elements that are placed with absolute position. So we see our z-index 1, 2, and 3. So we see 3 is on top of 2, 2 is on top of 1. We can set these in here. We can also use these as we see the z-index 4 is going to be a nested object, so it's going to be appearing inside of index 1. But you see, as it's a nested object, 3 is still going to be outside of it because it's going to be not inherited from the parent. All right, so that's tutorial 3. If you guys have any questions, feel free to send me an email, and be sure to complete your assignments on MindTap this week.